The Mocking Fairy by Walter de la Mare. Won't you look out of your window, Mrs. Gill? Quoth the fairy, nodding in the garden. Can't you look out of your window, Mrs. Gill? Quoth the fairy, laughing softly in the garden. But the air was still, the cherry boughs were still, and the ivy tod 'neath the empty sill. And never from her window looked out Mrs. Gill on the fairy shrilly mocking in the garden. What have they done with you, you poor Mrs. Gill? Quoth the fairy, brightly glancing in the garden. Where have they hidden you, you poor Mrs. Gill? Quoth the fairy, dancing lightly in the garden. But the night's faint veil now wrapped the hill. Stark 'neath the stars stood the dead still mill, and out of her cold cottage never answered Mrs. Gill, the fairy, mambling in the garden.